Honestly, I'd have a better chance of catching a disease than a pleasant conversation from your kind. That's the venomous whisper that silenced an entire airplane cabin. A well-dressed, middle-aged woman named Brenda Kellogg spat those words at a 16-year-old boy, Jamal Reed, for the simple crime of being assigned the seat next to her. She demanded a new seat, a new row, anything to escape his presence. The flight crew was stunned. The passengers were horrified. But what happened next wasn't just a confrontation. It was a revelation that no one saw coming. When the crew explained the flight was full, the boy she scorned didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at the flight attendant and delivered a line that would unravel Brenda's life forever. "It's fine. I own this row." The recycled air of the Boeing 777 hummed with the placid drone of imminent departure. Passengers shuffled along the narrow aisle, a river of wheeled luggage and weary sighs, each person focused on the small ritual of finding their designated space, stowing their bag, and sinking into the temporary anonymity of air travel. It was a routine dance of controlled chaos, the same on countless flights from New York's JFK to Los Angeles. Brenda Kellogg, seated comfortably in 12C, an aisle seat in the premium economy section she'd paid a handsome surcharge for, watched the procession with an air of detached judgment. Her blazer was impeccably pressed, a crisp navy that complemented her silver blonde hair, which was coiffed into a helmet of unyielding perfection. Her nails were a glossy, militant red, and they tapped impatiently on the armrest. She had already sanitized her entire seating area, the screen, the tray table, the seatbelt buckle with antiseptic wipes from her designer handbag, creating a sterile bubble for her 5-hour journey. She was a woman who believed firmly in order, in categories in the clear and unbreachable delineations of class and station. Her bubble was about to be burst. Down the aisle came Jamal Reed. At 16, he was caught in that lanky, awkward phase between boy and man. He was tall, with limbs that seemed a bit too long for his body, and he wore what most teens wore: stylish but comfortable sneakers, dark jeans, and a grey hoodie with the hood down. A pair of expensive-looking headphones was draped around his neck, and he clutched a worn paperback in one hand. He navigated the aisle with a quiet courtesy, murmuring, "Excuse me," as he squeezed past others, his eyes focused on the seat numbers above. He stopped at row 12. His ticket, checked and rechecked, read 12A, the window seat. Brenda watched him approach, her posture stiffening almost imperceptibly. Her lips painted the same shade of crimson as her nails thinned into a razor-straight line. She saw not a boy, but a type, an intrusion. Jamal offered a small, polite smile. "Excuse me, Mom. I'm just in at the window there." Brenda didn't move. She didn't even acknowledge his smile. Instead, she leaned slightly towards the woman in the middle seat, 12B, a nervous-looking tourist named Agnes, and spoke in a stage whisper loud enough for Jamal and several surrounding passengers to hear clearly. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she sighed, a gust of performative exasperation. "Just what I needed. 5 hours of this." Jamal's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He thought perhaps he'd misheard. Agnes, the woman in the middle, squirmed, her eyes darting between Brenda and Jamal, wishing she could dissolve into the seat cushions. "Mom?" Jamal asked, his voice still gentle. Brenda finally turned her head to look at him, her gaze traveling from his sneakers up to his face with a slow, insulting appraisal. "You," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are in 12A. "Yes, Mom," he replied, holding up his boarding pass as if to prove his legitimacy. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. She turned her head forward again, addressing the cabin at large. "Unbelievable. You pay for an upgrade, and this is the company you're forced to keep." The comments, vague yet pointed, now hung in the air, thick and toxic. Passengers in row 11 pretended to be engrossed in their safety cards. The couple in row 13 fell silent, their pre-flight chatter dying on their lips. Jamal stood in the aisle, his backpack feeling heavier by the second, the blood rising in his cheeks. It was a familiar sting, this casual, unprovoked venom, but it never hurt any less. He tried again, his politeness a shield. "Ma'am, could I please get to my seat? We're holding up the line." This direct address seemed to snap Brenda's last thread of civility. She looked back at him, her face a mask of undisguised contempt. This time she didn't bother to whisper. "Honestly," she said, her voice sharp and carrying, "I'd have a better chance of catching a disease than a pleasant conversation from your kind." A collective audible gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. A man in the row across shook his head in disgust. Agnes in the middle seat looked horrified, pressing herself as far away from Brenda as she could. The insult was no longer veiled. It was a naked blade thrust into the open. Jamal froze. The word "kind" echoed in the sudden, tense silence. It was a word that carried the weight of history, of prejudice, of pure, unadulterated racism. He was no longer just a teenager trying to get to his seat. He was a symbol, a target. Just then, a flight attendant named Faye arrived, her professional smile faltering as she sensed the charged atmosphere. Faye had been with the airline for over a decade. She had seen medical emergencies, drunken outbursts, and panic attacks at 35,000 feet. She was an expert at de-escalation, but the look on Brenda's face told her this was something different. This was ugly. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Faye asked, her tone even and calm as she addressed Brenda while giving Jamal a reassuring glance. "Yes, there is a problem," Brenda snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "I am not sitting next to him for 5 hours. It's completely unacceptable. I am a Platinum Medallion member, and I expect a certain standard of comfort and security. I want a different seat. Now." Faye's eyes hardened slightly, but her voice remained a placid sea of professionalism. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass, please?" Jamal handed it to her. Faye glanced at it and nodded. "He's in the correct seat, ma'am. 12A. "I don't care if his ticket says he's flying the plane," Brenda retorted, crossing her arms. "I am telling you, I will not be seated next to him. Move him or move me. I don't care which, just get it done." Faye took a slow, deep breath. "Ma'am, boarding is almost complete, and this is a completely full flight to Los Angeles. There are no other seats available in any class." "That sounds like a you problem, not a me problem," Brenda said, her sense of entitlement a fortress around her. "I'm sure you can find someone who would be more than happy to switch with me. Perhaps someone more compatible." She glanced meaningfully at Jamal, leaving no doubt as to what compatible meant. Faye felt a surge of anger, but she held it in check. This was a delicate situation that could escalate and delay the entire flight. "Ma'am, I am not going to ask another passenger to move because of your preference," Faye said, choosing her words carefully. "And I certainly will not be asking this young man who is assigned to his ticketed seat to relocate." "Then you are refusing to help a customer?" Brenda challenged, her voice growing louder, attracting more attention. "I want to speak to your supervisor. I want to speak to the captain. I will not be subjected to this." The standoff was complete. Jamal stood silently in the aisle, the object of a scorn he had done nothing to provoke. Brenda sat entrenched in her seat, a monument to her own bigotry. Faye, the flight attendant, was caught between airline policy and a passenger's hateful ultimatum. The entire cabin was now watching, waiting to see who would break first. The hum of the engines seemed to fade, replaced by the thrum of a deeply human and deeply ugly drama. The tension in row 12 had become a palpable force, a localized weather system of pure hostility. Faye, the flight attendant, maintained her professional composure, but it was a thin veneer over a growing frustration. She spoke into her wrist-worn communicator, her voice low and urgent, updating her lead flight attendant, a man named Gregory, on the situation. "I have a passenger in 12C, refusing to allow the passenger in 12A to take his seat," she murmured. "It's a sensitive issue." Brenda watched her, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She believed she had won. In her world, complaining loudly enough always produced results. The system was designed to placate people like her people who understood how to wield their status, however minor, like a weapon. Gregory arrived moments later. He was a tall, imposing man with a calm demeanor that had been forged in thousands of hours of in-flight crises. He knelt in the aisle, bringing himself to eye level with Brenda, a classic de-escalation technique. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he began, his voice a soothing baritone. "My name is Gregory. I'm the lead flight attendant. Faye tells me we have a bit of a seating issue." "It's not an issue," Brenda corrected him sharply, refusing to be placated by his calm tone. "It's a complete failure of customer service. I have paid for a premium seat, and I am being forced into an uncomfortable and, frankly, unsafe situation." Gregory glanced up at Jamal, who was now standing awkwardly to the side, trying to make himself as small as possible while other passengers squeezed past. Jamal's face was a stoic mask, but Gregory could see the hurt and humiliation in his eyes. "I can assure you, ma'am, our airline prioritizes the safety of all our passengers," Gregory said, turning back to Brenda. "This young man is a ticketed passenger just like you. And as Faye explained, this is a completely full flight. Every single seat is occupied. There is simply nowhere else to move you." "I find that hard to believe," Brenda scoffed. "Someone can be moved. Someone can be upgraded. Someone can be downgraded. Make it happen. We cannot displace another passenger because you don't wish to sit next to this young man." Gregory stated, his voice now carrying a firmer edge. "That would be discriminatory, and we absolutely do not do that." The word discriminatory hung in the air. Brenda recoiled as if struck. "How dare you!" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This has nothing to do with discrimination. This is about my comfort and my personal boundaries. I have a right to not feel threatened." Across the aisle, a man in a business suit finally spoke up. "Threatened? The kid hasn't said a word to you. The only one threatening anyone around here is you." Brenda shot him a withering glare. "You will stay out of this. This is none of your business." "You made it everyone's business when you started shouting," the man retorted, before turning back to his newspaper. Gregory saw the situation spiraling. The captain would be calling soon, demanding to know the reason for the delay. They were on a tight schedule. "Ma'am," Gregory said, his tone final, "you have two options. You can allow the young man to take his seat, and we can all have a peaceful flight to Los Angeles. Or you can choose to deplane. We will not hold this aircraft for you. The choice is yours." It was the airline equivalent of drawing a line in the sand. Brenda stared at him, her face flushed with fury. "Deplane." The humiliation of being escorted off the aircraft in front of all these people was almost unthinkable. But the prospect of sitting beside Jamal for 5 hours felt to her warped sensibilities like a greater punishment. Her mind raced, searching for another move, another way to assert her dominance. She was about to unleash another tirade to demand the captain's presence and threaten lawsuits when a quiet voice cut through the tension. It was Jamal. He had been silent throughout the entire exchange, a passive figure in the drama swirling around him. Now he stepped forward, his eyes not on Brenda, but on Faye and Gregory. "It's all right," he said, his voice steady and clear, carrying an authority that seemed at odds with his youthful appearance. "She doesn't have to move." Faye and Gregory looked at him surprised. Agnes in the middle seat let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Perhaps the boy was going to offer to move himself, to take the path of least resistance to end the mortifying spectacle. Brenda smirked, interpreting his words as a surrender. She saw it as a victory, a confirmation of her superior position. But Jamal wasn't finished. He held the flight attendant's gaze, a calm, unreadable expression on his face. He took a small breath, and then delivered the 4 words that would detonate the entire situation. 4 words that no one could have possibly anticipated. "I own this row." Silence. Not just a lack of talking, but a profound, vacuum-sealed silence that sucked the air out of the cabin. Gregory, who was still kneeling, froze. Faye's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Brenda's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, uncomprehending shock. The man across the aisle lowered his newspaper. Agnes looked at Jamal as if he had just sprouted a second head. The phrase, "I own this row," didn't compute. It was nonsensical. People bought seats. They didn't buy entire rows of seats on a commercial airliner. It was a statement of such audacious, impossible power that for a moment everyone wondered if they had heard him correctly. Gregory was the first to recover, his training kicking in. He blinked, shaking his head slightly as if to clear it. "I'm sorry, son," he said, his voice gentle, as if speaking to someone who was confused. "What did you just say?" Jamal's expression didn't change. He simply repeated himself, his voice just as calm, just as certain as before. "I said I own this row. Seat 12A, 12B, and 12C. They belong to me. My father bought all 3 seats, so I wouldn't be disturbed on my way to visit him." He then turned his gaze slowly, deliberately to Brenda. "So you see, you're not sitting in your seat. You're sitting in my seat, but it's okay." He added a hint of steel beneath the politeness. "You can stay. I don't mind." The implication was devastating, the reversal of power absolute. Brenda Kellogg was not the aggrieved Platinum member. She was an unwelcome guest. And the quiet boy she had just tried to expel was in fact her host. The cabin remained utterly silent, every passenger within earshot processing the spectacular twist that had just unfolded. The drama was far from over. It had just entered an entirely new and far more humiliating act. The silence that followed Jamal's declaration was thick with disbelief. The words, "I own this row," echoed in the confined space of the aircraft, replaying in everyone's mind. It was a concept so alien to the standard experience of air travel that it took a few moments to be processed as anything other than a joke or a delusion. Brenda Kellogg was the first to find her voice, and it was laced with scornful laughter. "Oh, that's Rich," she cackled, looking around for validation. "He owns the row. Did you hear that? This kid thinks he can just say, he owns the row. What's next? You own the whole plane." She turned her venom back on Jamal. "Listen, boy, I don't know what kind of fantasy world you're living in, but this is the real world. Now stop this nonsense before you get yourself thrown off this flight for causing a disturbance." But Gregory, the lead flight attendant, was no longer looking at Brenda. His eyes were fixed on Jamal, and then on the manifest he held on his tablet. His expression was one of dawning realization. He had seen strange things in his career, celebrities booking seats for their priceless cello's nervous flyers, buying 2 seats for themselves, but an entire row was rare. He quickly tapped on the screen, scrolling to the passenger information for row 12. His eyes widened. He tapped again, confirming the details. There it was clear as day in the airline's own system. Seat 12A, Reed Jamal. Seat 12B, Reed Pax Extra. Seat 12C, Reed Pax Extra. Pax Extra was the code for an extra seat purchased by a passenger for comfort, privacy, or size. All 3 seats, including the one Brenda was currently occupying, were under a single booking confirmation number, paid for by one Donovan Reed. Gregory knew that name. Donovan Reed wasn't just some wealthy passenger. He was a titan of the tech industry, the founder and CEO of Ether Dynamics, a company that had recently signed a multi-billion-dollar contract to overhaul the logistical software for this very airline. Donovan Reed wasn't just a VIP, he was a paradigm-shifting partner. The airline's executives would trip over themselves to keep him happy, and this quiet, unassuming teenager was his son. The entire dynamic of the situation had just been flipped on its head like a pancake. This wasn't a case of a racist passenger harassing another passenger. This was a case of a passenger harassing the son of one of the airline's most important business associates while sitting in a seat that had been purchased for that very son's comfort. Gregory stood up slowly, his face a carefully controlled mask of neutrality, though inside his mind was racing through emergency protocols he never thought he'd need. He looked at Faye, and with a barely perceptible nod, communicated the gravity of the new reality. Faye's professional calm was now tinged with genuine astonishment. "Ma'am," Gregory said, his voice now devoid of any of the earlier soothing tones. It was flat formal and ice-cold. He was no longer speaking to a valued customer, but to a major liability. "It appears there has been a mistake, a significant one." He showed the tablet screen to Faye, who gasped quietly. He then turned the screen towards Brenda. "As you can see," Gregory continued, "all 3 seats in this row, 12A, 12B, and 12C, were purchased under a single reservation for Mr. Jamal Reed. You, Ms. Kellogg, are listed in our system as being on standby. When the passenger ticketed for 12C, did not check in our system automatically assigned you to this seat from the standby list just before boarding." Brenda stared at the tablet, her brain refusing to process the information. Standby. She had a confirmed ticket. She'd booked weeks ago. She started to fumble for her purse to find her printed confirmation, her mind scrambling to find a foothold in a world that was suddenly tilting on its axis. "That's impossible," she stammered, her voice losing its commanding tone, replaced by a note of high-pitched panic. I paid for this seat. I have a receipt." The original passenger for 12C was Mr. Donovan Reed himself. Gregory explained, delivering another blow. He was scheduled to fly with his son but cancelled at the last minute. However, he did not cancel the seat, he simply removed his name, leaving the seat paid for and attached to his son's reservation. The gate agent must have seen an empty seat in the system, and assuming it was available, moved you up from your original booking in standard economy. It was a clerical error, but the fact remains this seat is part of Mr. Reed's booking. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Brenda hadn't gotten a lucky upgrade. She had been the beneficiary of a fluke, a system error that had placed her, a woman seething with racial prejudice, directly into the private, purchased space of the very target of her hate. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Jamal, meanwhile, finally spoke to the woman in the middle seat, Agnes. "Excuse me, Mom," he said kindly. "That's my seat too, but I'd be happy for you to stay there. I just need to get past to the window." Agnes, who had been watching the entire exchange with the wide eyes of a terrified mouse, practically levitated out of her seat. "Oh no, of course, please you take it. I can stand," she stammered, utterly mortified to be involved. "No, please, you're fine," Jamal insisted gently. I don't need all 3 seats. My dad just gets protective. Please sit." He gave her a reassuring smile, and she sank back down, looking at him with a newfound sense of awe. With Agnes's cooperation, Jamal finally squeezed past and settled into 12A by the window. He put his headphones on, picked up his paperback, and effectively withdrew from the situation he had just demolished. His work was done. Now all eyes were on Brenda. She was no longer the imperious queen of her domain. She was a trespasser, an interloper. The crew was not there to serve her, but to manage the problem she had become. Gregory looked down at her, his face grim. "Ms. Kellogg," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Given the circumstances and the comments you made earlier, I am now offering you one final choice. You can remain in this seat for the duration of the flight as a guest of Mr. Reed. Or I can have you escorted off this aircraft right now. We need to close the doors." Brenda sat frozen, trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The entire cabin was staring at her, their expressions a mixture of pity, contempt, and schadenfreude. To her right sat the innocent tourist she had implicated in her bigotry. To her left was the empty seat that belonged to the boy she had just humiliated, and in the aisle stood a flight attendant who now held all the power. The fortress of her entitlement had been razed to the ground, and she was left exposed and utterly devastatingly silent. The choice Gregory presented to Brenda Kellogg was not really a choice at all. It was a sentence. To deplane would be to accept a public and immediate defeat, to be marched out of the cabin in a walk of shame that would be seared into the memory of every passenger. To stay would be to endure 5 hours of a different kind of torture, a silent, suffocating humiliation, trapped in a space that was not hers next to the very people she had wronged. She chose the latter. It was a decision born not of apology or remorse, but of a desperate last-ditch effort to salvage a shred of dignity to avoid the overt spectacle of being removed. With a barely perceptible jerky nod, she acquiesced. Her face was a pale, bloodless mask, her earlier crimson fury drained away, leaving behind a sallow grey of utter mortification. Gregory gave a curt nod. "Very well." He turned and spoke into his communicator. "All stations' cabin is secure for departure. We're closing the doors." The heavy thud of the aircraft door ceiling felt like the closing of a tomb. For Brenda, it was. The engines began to spool up with a rising whine, and the plane pushed back from the gate. There was no escape now. The flight to Los Angeles was 5 hours and 23 minutes long. For Brenda Kellogg, it was an eternity spent in a self-imposed hell. She sat ramrod straight, her hands clenched in her lap, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. She stared resolutely forward at the seat back in front of her, her focus absolute, as if she could make the rest of the world disappear through sheer force of will. She did not look to her right at Agnes, who spent the entire flight pressed against the armrest, trying to physically occupy as little space as possible, and she certainly did not look to her left, past the empty middle seat to the window where Jamal sat. Jamal, for his part, seemed entirely unbothered. He had created the new reality, and then simply inhabited it. He listened to music, read his book, a dense-looking science fiction novel, and occasionally gazed out the window at the endless carpet of clouds. He was the picture of teenage tranquility, a stark contrast to the woman stewing in silent agony just a few feet away. His victory was so complete that it required no further action, no gloating, no acknowledgement of his vanquished foe. His calm was in itself the ultimate power move. The other passengers, now fully aware of the drama's incredible climax, settled into the flight, but the atmosphere remained charged. Whispers rustled through the cabin like dry leaves. People craned their necks, pretending to stretch, just to get another look at the now infamous woman in 12C, Unseen by Brenda, several rows back, a college student named Ben had his phone discreetly propped against the window, its camera lens aimed down the aisle. He had started recording the moment Brenda had shouted, "I am not sitting next to him." He had captured her entire tirade, Faye's and Gregory's professional responses, and the stunned silence that followed Jamal's quiet revelation. He hadn't captured Jamal's line itself, but he had caught the immediate aftermath, the crew's reaction, Brenda's shocked face, and Gregory confirming the status of the seats. It was explosive footage. As soon as the plane reached 10,000 feet and the Wi-Fi signal became available, Ben, like dozens of others who had purchased the in-flight internet package connected to the world below. He quickly edited the most damning parts of the video, together added a simple text overlay. Karen refuses to sit next to black teen on JFK LAX flight, gets epic reality check, and uploaded it to TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. He used hashtags Warnath Plane Karen, Cross Flying While Black, Hash Instant Karma, JFK. Before the beverage service had even reached row 10, the video was beginning to smolder online. The flight attendants treated Brenda with a chillingly correct professionalism. When the drink cart arrived, Faye paused beside her. "Ma'am, would you care for a beverage?" Her voice was perfectly neutral, betraying no emotion. Brenda shook her head, a short, sharp jerk. "No." "And for you, ma'am?" Faye asked Agnes, who nervously requested a ginger ale. Faye then leaned slightly across the empty seat toward Jamal. "Young man, Mr. Reed, anything for you. It's all complimentary, of course." The subtle emphasis was not lost on anyone nearby. "Just a water, please," Jamal said, removing his headphones for a moment. "Thank you." He took the water, offered a polite thanks again, and returned to his world of clouds and science fiction. Brenda felt every single interaction like a physical blow. The politeness directed at Jamal was a spotlight on her own disgrace. The empty seat beside her 12B became a vast, yawning chasm representing the social distance she had created. It was the seat that should have been occupied by a billionaire tech mogul, Donovan Reed. Instead, it was a buffer, a no-man's land, in the Cold War she had started, and so spectacularly lost. She had to use the lavatory once, about 3 hours into the flight. The walk down the aisle was an ordeal. She kept her eyes fixed on the grey carpet, but she could feel the stares of other passengers burning into her. She heard a snicker from a few rows back. When she returned, she had to perform the excruciating ritual of asking Agnes to let her pass. Agnes scrambled to her feet, without a word, her face averted. Brenda squeezed past the back of her blazer, brushing against the empty seat that wasn't hers. The humiliation was a slow, steady drip. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just the cold, heavy weight of her actions settling upon her. She was isolated, marooned on an island of her own prejudice, in a seat she had no right to, on a journey that felt like a descent into a social abyss. The plane flew westward, chasing the sun, but for Brenda Kellogg the world was growing darker with every passing mile. And on the ground, a digital storm was brewing, preparing to make landfall, the very moment she stepped off the plane. The karma had only just begun its work. While Brenda Kellogg endured her 5-hour purgatory at 35,000 feet, the video of her meltdown was achieving a velocity she could never have imagined. Ben's 90-second clip was a perfect viral artifact. It was dramatic, it had a clear villain and a sympathetic victim, and it featured a satisfying David versus Goliath twist. The internet, with its insatiable appetite for righteous indignation, feasted upon it. By the time the Boeing 777 began its descent into the hazy skies of Los Angeles, the video had been viewed over 1 million times on TikTok alone. It had been ripped and re-uploaded to Twitter by major aggregation accounts, where it was being retweeted thousands of times per minute. The hashtags Waitras of Plain Karen, and Brenda Kellogg, a name someone who knew her from a previous job quickly supplied in the comments, were trending. Online sleuths with the terrifying efficiency of a digital hive mind got to work. Within an hour of her name being posted, they had found her. Her LinkedIn profile was the first to fall. Brenda Kellogg, Senior Vice President of Marketing at a high-end New York-based luxury furniture brand called Verbeck & Associates. Verbeck's whole brand was built on an image of quiet old-money sophistication and impeccable taste. A viral video of one of their top executives spewing racist bile on an airplane was antithetical to their every marketing message. The company's social media pages were the first beachhead. Every post on Verbeck's Instagram, a perfectly curated photo of a $20,000 sofa, a chic minimalist armchair, was flooded with comments. Is this the sofa Brenda Kellogg sits on when she's not harassing teenagers? Does this come in entitled white? I'd buy this, but I'm worried my black friends wouldn't be allowed to sit on it. Brenda Kellogg. The company's Google reviews plummeted from a 4.8 to a 1.2 in under 2 hours. The review section became a forum for outrage. As the plane taxied to the gate at LAX, Brenda's phone, which had been in airplane mode, reconnected to the network. It immediately began to vibrate, a frantic, non-stop buzzing that was so violent it made a noise against the plastic wall of the cabin. A torrent of notifications, texts, emails, missed calls poured in. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing in confusion. A text from her sister Brenda, "Turn off your phone." "Call me." "Do not look at the internet." A text from a colleague. "What the hell did you do? The CEO is trying to reach you." Then she saw the push notifications from news apps, the Daily Mail, the New York Post, TMZ. Her own name was in the headlines. "Watch vicious Plain Karen tells black teen she'll catch a disease from him." Brenda Kellogg Marketing SVP identified as woman in viral airline tirade. The blood drained from her face. Her world, which had been slowly crumbling for 5 hours, now shattered into 1,000,000 pieces in 5 seconds. She felt a wave of nausea so profound she had to brace herself against the seat in front of her. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The familiar rush of passengers eager to deplane began. Brenda didn't move. She was paralyzed, staring at the phone in her hand as if it were a venomous snake. Jamal gathered his book, slipped it into his backpack, and stood up. He politely nodded to Agnes, who was already scrambling into the aisle. He made his way out without a single glance back at Brenda. At the door of the aircraft, Gregory, the lead flight attendant, stopped him for a moment. "Mr. Reed," Gregory said, his voice low and sincere. "On behalf of the entire crew, I want to apologize for what you experienced before departure. It was unacceptable." Jamal just shrugged, offering a small, tired smile. "It's not your fault. You guys handled it." "Thank you." "Your father will be met with a full report. Our corporate office will be reaching out," Gregory added. "It's okay. My dad knows I can handle myself," Jamal replied. And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the jet bridge, a teenager heading off to see his father. Brenda was one of the last to deplane. She moved like a zombie, her limbs stiff and uncoordinated. As she stepped into the terminal, she was met with a sight that confirmed her worst fears. A small crowd had gathered near the gate, held back by airport security. They weren't waiting for loved ones. They were waiting for her. Phones were held aloft, their cameras like 100 unblinking eyes. A TMZ cameraman shouted her name. "Brenda, why did you refuse to sit next to that young man? Are you a racist, Brenda?" She flinched as if she'd been slapped. She pulled her blazer tight around herself and tried to walk faster, her head down her face, hidden behind her curtain of now disheveled hair. The flashes were blinding. The questions were like daggers. She practically ran through the terminal, her carefully constructed composure completely gone, replaced by raw, hunted panic. She didn't know where she was going. Her planned car service was a distant memory. She just had to escape the cameras, the shouts, the judgment. She finally found refuge in a deserted corner, near a baggage claim carousel, her back against a cold tile wall. Her breath coming in ragged gasps. She pulled out her phone again, her hands shaking so badly she could barely operate it. An email sat at the top of her inbox. The subject line was chillingly simple. Subject: an urgent matter. It was from the CEO of Verbeck and Associates. Brenda, the email began dispensing with any and all pleasantries. I have been inundated with calls for the last 3 hours. The board is aware of the video circulating online. Your actions are in direct violation of our company's code of conduct and have caused catastrophic and immediate damage to our brand. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately. Do not come into the office. Do not contact any clients. Await further communication from HR and our legal counsel. Suspended. The word was a death knell. In the corporate world, a suspension like this announced via a blunt email from the CEO was just a procedural stop on the way to termination. She was already fired. She just hadn't received the official paperwork yet. In less than a day, Brenda Kellogg had gone from a senior vice president to a viral villain. She had lost her dignity on the plane, and now, standing alone by a baggage carousel at LAX, she had lost her career. The digital guillotine had fallen swift and merciless, and the karma was just getting started. The days following Brenda Kellogg's arrival in Los Angeles were a masterclass in accelerated ruin. The city which she had flown to for a high-profile design conference became her prison. She cancelled her attendance, holed up in her pre-booked luxury hotel room, and watched her life be dismantled in real time on every screen she owned. The suspension from Verbeck and Associates, as predicted, became a termination within 48 hours. The company released a public statement, a carefully crafted piece of corporate damage control that threw Brenda under the bus with ruthless efficiency. Verbeck and Associates was appalled to learn of the behavior of a now former employee, Brenda Kellogg. The statement read, "Her personal actions on that flight are abhorrent and stand in stark opposition to the values of inclusivity, respect and human decency that we hold dear. We are a company that celebrates diversity in all its forms. Ms. Kellogg's employment has been terminated effective immediately. We extend our sincerest apologies to the young man who was targeted by her unacceptable behavior." Her photo, a professionally taken headshot from the company website, was now everywhere, juxtaposed with grainy screenshots from the viral video. She was the face of modern public racism. Talk shows dissected her every word. Social commentators used her as a case study in entitlement. Her name became a verb. Don't get caught pulling a Brenda Kellogg. The fallout bled from her professional life into her personal one. The board of her expensive New York co-op, a place governed by arcane rules and fierce judgment, called an emergency meeting. Her presence in the building was now a reputational risk. She received a letter from the co-op's lawyer informing her that they were exploring options under the proprietary lease's objectionable conduct clause, a legal prelude to forcing a sale. Her home, her sanctuary of curated taste and social standing in the heart of Manhattan, was now threatened. Friends or people she had considered friends distanced themselves. Calls went to voicemail. Texts were left on read. The social circle she had meticulously cultivated, a world of gallery openings, charity luncheons and Hamptons weekends, evaporated. She was radioactive. To be associated with her was to risk catching the same social disease she had accused Jamal of carrying. Her sister, a beleaguered suburban mother in New Jersey, was her only remaining lifeline. "Brenda, what were you thinking?" her sister Carol pleaded over the phone, her voice strained. "My kids' friends are asking them if their aunt is the racist plane lady." It wasn't like that. Brenda tried to explain, her voice raspy from a combination of crying and disuse. I was tired, and he looked like a—" She couldn't even finish the sentence. What had he looked like? A boy? A teenager in a hoodie? He looked like what Brenda, Carol pressed her patience worn thin. Like a black kid. Is that a threat now? My God, we grew up in a diverse town. What happened to you? What had happened to her? Brenda had no answer. She had spent decades building a life that was a fortress of her own design, walled off by money status and a rigid belief in her own superiority. She saw the world in hierarchies, and she had always been near the top. Her prejudice wasn't a sudden aberration. It was a rot in the foundation of that fortress, a quiet, festering belief that certain kinds of people belonged in different lesser places. The incident on the plane wasn't the start of the disease. It was merely the first time a symptom had become publicly visible. Meanwhile, the other side of the story was also being told, but with a vastly different tone. A reporter from a major news outlet managed to get a statement from Donovan Reed's spokesperson. It was a model of grace and quiet strength. Donovan Reed is incredibly proud of the way his son Jamal conducted himself in a difficult and deeply unpleasant situation. The statement began, "Jamal was taught to meet aggression and prejudice, not with reciprocal hate, but with dignity and truth. The family considers the matter closed and will not be pursuing any legal action. Their focus remains on Jamal's well-being and his visit. They hope this incident can serve as a learning moment about the casual bigotry that still exists and the importance of treating every individual with basic human respect." The statement was a masterstroke. It refused to engage in the muck with Brenda, instead elevating the conversation. It made Jamal look even more mature, and his father even more admirable. There was no request for an apology, no threat of a lawsuit. The silence from the Reed family was in its own way more damning than any accusation. It communicated that Brenda Kellogg was simply not important enough to warrant any more of their energy. Jamal himself remained entirely out of the public eye. He spent the week with his father in his sprawling Bel Air home, swimming, playing video games, and talking about college applications. The viral storm with his name in it was a distant noise he was happy to ignore. His father had taught him a crucial lesson long ago: never let other people's ugliness define your own peace. For Brenda, there was no peace. Trapped in her hotel room with room service trays piling up outside her door, she obsessively scrolled through the wreckage of her life. She read the vicious comments, the news articles, the sanctimonious blog posts. She saw herself through the world's eyes and hated the reflection. But the hatred was still directed outward. It was the flight attendant's fault. It was the man with the camera phone's fault. It was the internet's fault. It was Jamal's fault for being there, for being quiet, for being the catalyst for her ruin. The concept of her own culpability was a shore she couldn't quite reach. In her mind, the punishment far outweighed the crime. It was just a few sentences, a moment of poor judgment. Did that warrant the complete demolition of her entire existence? The answer delivered by the silent, unforgiving judgment of the world was a resounding yes. The hard karma she had set in motion was not a single event, but a chain reaction, and it was still gathering speed, ready to strip her of everything she had ever valued. A month after the flight, the digital storm had passed, leaving behind the quiet, irrevocable landscape of Brenda Kellogg's new life. The trending hashtags were gone, replaced by new outrages, new villains. But for Brenda, the consequences were permanent. She had been forced to sell her New York co-op. The board's legal pressure was immense, and the publicity had made her continued residence untenable. She sold at a loss, desperate to escape the whispers in the lobby and the pitying glances from neighbors. With the proceeds, she rented a small anonymous apartment in a faceless suburb in Connecticut, a place where no one knew her name or her story. Her life of luxury, of Verbeck and Associates, and benefit galas was over. Her attempts to find new employment were exercises in futility. The moment a hiring manager Googled her name, the conversation would turn cold. Her once impressive resume was now toxic forever, tainted by the first page of search results. She was digitally excommunicated from the professional world she had once dominated. In a last desperate act, she hired a lawyer to see if she could sue the student who posted the video, the airline, anyone. The lawyer, a blunt, pragmatic man, listened to her story for 10 minutes before holding up a hand. "Ms. Kellogg," he said, his tone weary, "let me be frank. The student was in a public space, recording an event as it unfolded. You have no expectation of privacy when you are shouting on an airplane. The things you said are not in dispute. Suing would be like throwing gasoline on a fire. It will only bring the story back into the headlines, and you will lose. My advice, which I'm giving you for free, is to disappear and try to rebuild something quietly. There is no legal remedy for your situation." The finality of his words was crushing. There was no way back. One crisp autumn evening, several months later, Brenda was in her drab apartment, flipping through television channels. She was a ghost of her former self. Her sharp-tailored blazers had been replaced by nondescript sweaters. Her militant red nails were bare. Her perfectly coiffed hair was now just hair. The armor of her former life was gone. She stopped on a local news channel. They were running a Young Achievers segment. And then his face appeared on the screen. It was Jamal Reed. He wasn't in a hoodie this time. He was in a lab coat, standing beside a complex-looking apparatus. The anchor was speaking in an enthusiastic voice. "And tonight's young achiever is 16-year-old Jamal Reed, whose project on quantum entanglement has just won the prestigious National STEM Vanguard competition. His work, which judges called groundbreaking for a high school student, has earned him a full scholarship to Stanford University." The camera zoomed in on Jamal as he explained his project. He was articulate, brilliant, and passionate. He spoke about wanting to use physics to solve real-world problems. He radiated a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose. There was no mention of the airplane, no hint of the viral fame he had briefly endured. It was irrelevant to who he was. That incident was a footnote in his life. For Brenda, it had been the entire book. Brenda stared at the screen, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She saw the boy she had looked at with such contempt, the boy she had dismissed as being from the wrong kind. And she saw him for what he was, a bright, promising young man on his way to changing the world. She had tried to put him in a box defined by his race, and he had casually stepped out of it and into a future she could only dream of. The ultimate karma wasn't the loss of her job or her apartment. It wasn't the public shaming or the social isolation. The hardest karma, the final, crushing blow, was the inescapable, undeniable truth that she had been wrong. Her entire worldview, the prejudice that had fueled her actions, was a pathetic fallacy. Her life had been built on a lie, and the universe, in a moment of stunning clarity on a flight to Los Angeles, had forced her to see it. She turned off the television, and for the first time, sat in the silence of her empty apartment, without anger, without blame, without seeking a scapegoat. There was only a profound, hollow emptiness. The life she had destroyed had, in the end, been her own. That single act of prejudice on Flight 417 didn't just delay a plane, it detonated a life built on a fragile foundation of hate. Brenda Kellogg's story is a powerful, real-world reminder that in our hyper-connected age, the consequences of our actions can be swift, total, and inescapable. It's a story about the difference between perceived status and true character. While one person's world crumbled into dust because of the ugliness in her heart, the young man she targeted, Jamal Reed, continued to soar, proving that dignity and grace are the ultimate sources of strength. What do you think is the most powerful form of karma? Let us know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe for more true stories of justice and unexpected twists.